audience out there. My name is Roy Clark, and we're standing at Forrest Lawn now, obviously. But this used to be a place called Hudkins Ranch. And in 1940, believe it or not, I used to ride from Highland Park, 35 miles out here, and would take care of the horses and the barns and stuff of that nature. And I was in school at the time. Bobby Heron, who by the way is standing next to me, is part of the Hudkins. I was raised by one of the brothers, and there were 4 of them. And as I said, I came here in 1940 on and off on my summer vacation from Highland Park. But I actually started living here in 1942. And I lived here on the ranch. Bobby Heron came in, I don't recall exactly which year, but I'd say probably maybe 4 years later. Correct me, Bobby, if I'm wrong.
I was in the service overseas.
Yeah, so he was in the service at that time. But what you're looking at now is history in itself, you know, as you look out behind me, for example, I hope you can see the church behind. That's where the office, by the way, used to be for this facility. And the road that you came up here today on was all dirt. And where we're standing now, believe it or not, was a pasture that was encircled with a fence. And we ran horses through here. We had about 300 head of horses in those days. And as you will find out later on as we go on, this ranch was one of 2 that supplied the motion picture industry with wagons and horses and livestock. And it's just a history in itself, you know. Bobby, of course, and myself have been partners working through the business for, oh my God, so long as the case may be. I'm now in my 70s. Bobby's a little older than me, but not much. So we have a lot of history just in the business ourselves. And as we stand here really, and I got here earlier this morning, to thinking of all our partners and all our fellow workers and family who are here on this facility. Where the church is behind, by the way, I bought a plot many years ago, and I will return where my life really started. So it's just kind of great to be here and maybe talk about our yesterdays and things of that nature. Like you said, it's for Bobby, I'm sure the same. He's family. I was raised by one of the brothers. They're all gone by now. In fact, they're all gone by now. And Bobby and I are really only 2 of the Hudkins legendaries, the case may be, that are left. And I'll let Bobby kind of talk. I know I'm talking an awful lot about here, but it means a lot to both of us. So Bobby can kind of tell you what he might want to tell you, and I'll fill in because, as you can tell, I enjoy talking.
Great.
This property originally was 1,000 acres owned by the Providencia Land and Water Company. And Hudkins leased it for many, many years. And it looks quite different now. It looks like they've moved some of the hills around, and it's kind of hard to identify some of the old places because the landscape has changed so much. But Ace Hudkins was my stepfather. He's an ex-fighter, and he was the one that originally had the property. And there's a lot of history with the Hudson Brothers Ranch. We used to work at Warner Brothers, and then it was just a wash, and we used to ride the horses across the wash into the studios. And then down the road was what was called the River Bottom. There was a restaurant called the Hitching Post, and we used to ride our horses over there and have breakfast.
Which, by the way, is still there.
So it's it's a whole different era than it is now. It's a very, very interesting era. A lot of the wranglers that worked the horses were real cowboys, and they were off of ranches. And being around these guys is like being in the Old West.
Amazing. So we're also really interested in your lives as stunt performers and as cowboys in the movies. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you got started, how you went from growing up on the ranch to having a career in stunts.
That, just to be cousin Bobby, obviously. Yeah. As I said before, I lived in Highland Park. Came to Highland Park actually probably in the 30s, really. And ironically, how I got into the business is kind of interesting in itself, because at the time I was living in Highland Park, and that was just before the war, I had met a gentleman who sold horse meat. I know that sounds ironic, but that's what he did. And so I started working for him after school. And we sold filet mignons and steaks to Beverly Hills. We sold them some of the best places in town, believe me. But anyway, at that time, everybody wants to be a cowboy. And certainly I was no different than anybody else. But the point being, he indicated to me that he had a couple horses. And I said, really? Well, that really made my interest, obviously. Well, his couple of horses that he had, believe it or not, was right down the hill from where we're at now. And it was part of that time called the Mesa, which is on the other side of the area here. And it was a cavalry at that time. So I would come out on the weekends, and we're talking about in the late 30s, early 40s, and this ranch was existing at that time. And I had ridden over the hill, and then there was a hill, and now they've cut it down a little bit. And when I came over the hill, I met the Hudkins family, as the case may be. And I started, believe me, I made contact with the entire family. Art Hudkins was a brother of his stepdad. And when my family split and went in two directions at an early part of my life, Art Hudkins took me over because I had started working here in the summers for, by the way, $22 a week, and I lived in a little house called the bunkhouse. If you look behind me where the church is, about 200 or 300 feet this way where you fellows are standing right now. So I started working on the summers, and when my family split and went in two different directions, my mom took 5 children, went to Las Vegas. I came to Hudkins, and that was 1942. And my life started here. I took care of the horses here, made $22 a week here. We tell the stories about the old Trigger, big horse, and I know I'm talking all about myself, but it is part of the ranch. And on the Saturdays and Sundays, I'd ride Trigger down at River Park, and I'd be Roy Rogers. And on Sunday, we owned Silver, Lone Ranger's horse. Sunday, I'd put on a different shirt, and old Roy Boy would ride down Griffith Park, and I was the Lone Ranger. That started my career here as an extra, which Bobby and I worked together for so long. I never was a real cowboy, but I cowboyed in this business for the best stars in town, and I thought I did a pretty good job. I horseback pretty good. From a cowboy standpoint, the rodeos and stuff was never part of my life, but I learned to do a lot of things here thanks to a lot of people, and this is truly, for me, an incredible memory. I think I said something earlier that where the church is, 200 or 300 feet to the right of where you're looking at the church, is a place that I'll return because I bought that several years ago. So this is truly, for me, memory lane.
Well, I started my movie career right here when I got out of the service in 1946. And at that time, there was a polo field down below and a racetrack because the Hudkins brothers were into racehorses also, and they played polo. And so I learned from the Hudkins family starting from 1946, and I had an athletic background, so I kind of eased into the all-around stunt work, and I've had a very nice career, and I got in it, of course, because of my stepfather, Ace Hudkins, who was a very famous fighter. In fact, he had over 100 fights and was never knocked out. He was one tough cookie. And it's been a great career, and we worked mostly in the Valley, Warner Brothers and Universal, Columbia Ranch, Republic Studios, and it was a great career, and we really enjoyed it. And we're the only two left of all of the old timers.
Of course, we're still young. Can you tell that? So when you realize that two of the younger guys are still here, obviously.
Yeah, I love it. So can you talk to us a little bit about some of the shows you guys worked on and some of the films?
Well, those of us, like Bobby and myself, and now I'm talking about, when you think about how long, when you think about how long we've been in the business, you have to be careful of not wanting to brag, and you don't mean it that way. Because Bobby and I, and so many people like us, had the opportunities in those days of working for the big names in this business. The big names in that time was, of course, Yakima Canutt, Cliff Lyons, the Ergoins. I mean, we worked for all those people. Well, I was just, you were asking about our background and where we come from and stuff like that. And as it turns out, I'm kind of writing a little background about my life in general, because I found that maybe people are kind of interested in where you came from and what happened. And for myself, I was born in Dalton, Pennsylvania in 1928. Had no idea, obviously, at that time what was going to wound up out here in a little town called Montrose. From there, wound up in the Highland Park area. And as it turned out, in the business now, we'll have to jump to the business, because whoever would ever think about, I traveled with the crops with my family. We picked everything you ever thought about picking in your life. We did it. Mattress on the bed. You talk about times, those were the times. But you know what? They were good times, really. And my life changed when I came here. It really came because all of a sudden the guy who was picking raspberries and strawberries for 25 cents a box, in his 50 years that I've been in business, and I have, and proudly so, I had the opportunity to be a stuntman. I started out as an extra, started out as a stuntman, happened to get a director's card and had it for 35 years. Was I a big director? No, not necessarily, but I did a lot of second units as I came along. I was lucky enough to run into a gentleman by the name of Jim Garner when we did Maverick, and for me, that was probably the best 42 years of my life, because I've been with Jimmy for some 42 years and did something like 144 Rockford Files. But back to the Cowboys, because we're really talking about the West, and that's where it all started. Fortunate enough to do about 10 films with John Wayne. I doubled Clark Gable. I've doubled Errol Flynn. I did High Sierra, 10 Commandments. Not that I've done so much, but you got to realize in 50 years that's just part of your life, And television, there was no television when I came here. There wasn't no television in the business. So when Bobby and I say Bobby because he was part of it, when we started Warner Brothers with the Cheyenne and the Bronco and Sugarfoot and Bourbon Street Bee and stuff like that, and even though the money was not great, $15 a day, by the way, you know what? It was a great time of our life. And I think we all look back and say, hey, you know what? That was a special time of my life. And for me, here we are standing, it's like I said, I'm repeating myself, but we're standing on a place for me that started 60-some years ago, and I'm reliving those yesterdays. And for me, it's a special day, and I appreciate it.
Well, I fortunately had a athletic background. I was raised in Hawaii. I did a lot of diving, swimming, and when I came here, well, I was born in LA, but raised in Hawaii. But when I started my movie career, I hooked up with Gene LaBelle, who was the martial arts guru, and I learned martial arts from Gene, and my stepdad being a boxer, I learned to box from him. So, and then I learned to ride here on Forrest Lawn, which wasn't Forrest Lawn then, of course. So I was very lucky that everything kind of dovetailed together. And as far as shows I've done, if you go on Google, there's an international movie database, and I'm in that, as just about all performers are, and it has our track records. And I have about 450 credits, and there's a lot were left out, like the Wild West. I did about 45 of those, doubling Ross Martin, and then I doubled Maverick, and not Maverick, but Father Dowling.
Bless your heart.
And Matlock, that's what I meant to say. I doubled Matlock, and I did so many shows. I worked on all the Sam Peckinpah's westerns in Mexico. In fact, I was in a show with Burt Lancaster and Audrey Hepburn, and I had to do a very tough gag, and I felt it was the height of my western movie horse career. I had to ride a horse bareback at full tilt, leading 3 head of horses. and jumped to the back of the one I was riding over to the next one. And then the idea was when he got tired, I jumped in his back over to the next one. And I missed sometimes. And then they run over you. But eventually I transferred all 3 horses. And I was kind of proud that I was able to do that, having learned to ride basically late in life. And I've done several shows with Sam Peckinpah, movies in Mexico, and they were always rough. Sam liked small Mexican towns where no one spoke English, and they were pretty rough. And of course I did all those westerns at Warner Brothers with Roy. They had, what, 6 or 7 westerns going at once?
All the time, that's all there was.
We used to go from one show to the other.
Never out of work in those days because that was the time of the Western. Everybody was doing the Western, obviously. They were cheap to do, and it's just, they kept you busy all the time. The money was great for the air at the time like that. I think Bobby and I came at a time when obviously the West was a big tournament thing. It was also the time that, you know, Bobby and I, for example, it was kind of typecasting in the earlier days, and guys who horsebacked as we did never really got a chance to do much car work until later on in life, honestly. Until I did Rockford, they just wouldn't kind of let you drive a car. But in the same respect, those who drove cars in those days didn't do many westerns. It was kind of ironic, but times were to change. As guys got into the business, some of the great guys of yesterday, and I think I named them, the Davy Sharps and the Cliffs and the Yakimas, certainly names that we will always look up to for. But the business changed and gave a lot of people opportunity to expand their knowledge and their expertise, and maybe do a little better in the business. But you know, speaking for myself, I don't know that I ever did read the great big stunts. I think I was just I think I was a good worker. I think I was a good stuntman for the things that I did, and I later on was lucky enough to maybe, you know, upgrade a little bit, become a coordinator, and later on in life become a second unit director. You know, it's been a great career. Because now at the age that both Bobby and I are at, it's really great, honestly, to look back at our yesterdays and look forward to tomorrows, obviously. But we've had some great yesterdays, and you know, with Connie, bless his heart, who a big part of our lives. There's always people here that we need to say, hey, you know what? They did a lot for us, and hopefully along the way, we've been able, in our own little way, to maybe help another young Roy Clark or another young Bobby Heron along the way. That didn't necessarily used to be true in the earlier days, but in spite of it, it's been for both of us, and for Connie, who's standing behind you, obviously, it's been an incredible journey. And like you said, I thank everybody.
I was 84 at the time, and I did a stair fall on Reno 911, and they were kind of amazed that a guy 84 doing a stair fall. Well, earlier this year, I worked on Chuck. I got hit over the head and knocked down, and I was 85 at the time. And, well, I guess it was, no, that was this year. And I'm going to be 87 in a few days. So, yeah, I was 86 then. So, like I say, we're very proud that we're both still here after all of these years of falling off of horses and stagecoaches. And I did a fall off an oil derrick on Oklahoma Crude, which is, an oil derrick's pretty high. I fell into an 8x12 catcher of cardboard boxes with a few mattress pads on top. And the guys today going into these big airbags, I think they'd find that a little intimidating, but that's all we knew. People sometimes try to compare stunts today of stunts yesterday.
Heron Clark interview, take 3.
And action.
You know, I can kind of start talking about how improvements are made from what was yesterday and what's today and how was stunts yesterday. In as much as we're both kind of in the Western world, but yet we're familiar with all the activities that took place in those older days. And you can start off with high falls, for example. Yesterday, a high fall sometimes would and I say sometimes, it was like a 35 or 40 footer. Today, well, people are going 300 feet. I mean, honestly, they really can do it and doing it safely. The difference is that in those days, even though I was not a high haul man myself, I certainly witnessed an awful lot of them, but going to sawhorses and 1x6s with some cardboard boxes underneath them was the way of the West. That's exactly what they did. And today, I mean, there's no limit to what you can do with technology, because technology has brought us to that event. I think the same thing happens with cars, for example. I've done a lot of car work, but I've not done a lot of car turnovers, but there again, I've been there and I've seen it all. And yesterday, believe it or not, and Connie, who's standing behind you, can verify all this, is the fact that, you know, in those days earlier, guys went to grab straps on a seat and turned cars over incredibly. Convertibles, hardtops, and there was no thing as there is today, what they call the cannons, which can send you into orbit rather dramatically. But the cars are also so much safer due to NASCAR, which I think has a lot to do with it. I think the things that maybe haven't changed a lot, even though the SPCA and stuff of that nature with the livestock, they used to do run-and W's and pitfalls and stuff like that, which were really incredible. They were really hard on your body. That was to change when they brought in trained fallen horses, which both Bobby and I had. I had two of them. Bobby, I know, had one. In fact, I fell his horse on several occasions. So I think what's happened is that technology brought around by young people, young personalities. And when I talk about, as I did earlier, the Yakima Canucks and the Cliff Lions of yesterday, did they do some remarkable things? Without a doubt. I mean, taking a stagecoach off a cliff with 6 horses into the water, for real. Now that's pretty incredible, and we can go back to what they did in those days. And it's just, they don't allow that today. And if they did allow it, they would do it in a technical way that the new knowledge that we've got today allows you to do all that stuff. I remember an individual, and his name is Terry Leonard, who did a thing called Romancing the Stone, where he went up a stuntman went off of a very high cliff. I don't recall exactly the height, but for story's sake, I'll say 80 or 90 feet into the water, and rode a car off that. I think if you did it today, technology allows you a lot of things. You could float down the river and then go to a technical aspect and take all the thing out of it. It was one of those things that he probably hardly made. If you listen to him talk about it, could have been his last go-round. But you could do that same thing today, over and over and over again, maybe even do it better, and so much safer. So that's what's happened. Time has allowed us to do so much in our business, and I think the earlier stunt guys were, boy, I'll tell you what, they were hard, rough type guys. Are they good people today? Without a doubt, because so many of the young people today are so versatile. They can do it all. In our days, at least in my day, we had basically one person who did it all, and his name was, of course, why can't I think, Davy Sharp, but he could really do it all. But when we talk about the other names that I had, for example, they specialized in, quote, either car work. Kerry Lofton would be one of the great of all time. You know, Yakima, Cliff Lions, who probably never did a car stunt. I don't mean that rudely, but they probably never did really a car stunt. But they did some of the greatest Western things that was ever filmed. So I think that's where I'm at. I think that Bobby probably has a lot to maybe add to that kind of situation, but I think that's where technology has brought us, without a doubt.
Well, talking about shows we did, I worked on a movie called Convoy. In fact, the last few years I've doubled Ernest Borgnine quite a few times. I started out doubling Tony Curtis, and I ended up doubling Ernest Borgnine as we both got heavier. And
only Bobby.
Anyway, I had this stunt to do, being forced off the road on a movie called Convoy, and I was supposed to go off this ramp. And unfortunately, they cued me late, and I was doing about 80 miles an hour when I came up alongside this big truck, which forced me off. There was nowhere else to go, so I went on this ramp doing about 80 miles an hour. And I went 15 feet to a billboard. I went 50 feet beyond that to the roof of a barn, and I landed 100 feet beyond that. And that was quite a stunt. And
I want to tell a little story about that stunt, by the way, because he wrote me a letter and he sent me a picture, and he said to me, "Roy, a little fast, maybe a little too far. And I got to tell you something, it did get my attention. But what he didn't tell you was inside of the barn, they had this entire barn, which they had measured off with boxes. So really, basically, his car was going to go through the billboard, land in the barn, but land in all these boxes, is the way that I was told. Land in all these boxes would have cushioned him dramatically. I say that because I was fortunate enough to, and I will repeat myself a couple of times, to Connie, who's standing behind you, but I happened to be lucky enough to go down and watch one of his stuntmen jump out of a building in a car to something that I had never seen before in my life, to all these boxes. And it was, I got to tell you something, you know, for me it was a special day. I had never seen anything like that in my life. And it was you know, he disappeared. It probably took us longer to get to all the boxes around him to get to where he was at, but it was truly an remarkable. But in Bobby's case, that's really kind of what was going to happen. He was going to be cushioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, in those boxes inside of the barn. Well, what happens, of course, when you miss the barn in its entirety and only take off the roof, things are going to get a little smarty. And in Bobby's case, he used to be about 6'3", and now Bobby's about 5'7" due to that one jump.
Yeah, a lot of stunts don't go as planned, but what you do, you adapt to the circumstances. And when they cued me late, I was obviously going too fast, but I had no option but to go off that ramp, and you can't go off a ramp de-accelerating. You have to accelerate. So I was going way too fast, and I knew I had to go faster to go off the ramp. And Sam Peckinpah, the director, said, "I don't care how far you go, don't be short, because then I don't have a shot." So Sam Peckinpah was a great director to work for. He was a lot of fun. And sometimes we do acting along with our stunts. Like I did a combination acting stunt thing for Conrad Palmisano on the Files from Police Squad, the first Naked Gun. And that was a lot of fun. I tried to smother O.J. Simpson with a pillow, and then went out the window and we had a big car chase. And Connie drove by in a car and I snatched him out and jumped in, and then we had a big car chase. But it was fun working for Connie, having you know, a stunt guy run things. It really helped. In fact, in the old days, we didn't have stunt coordinators as a rule. The first assistant usually made the adjustments and kind of ran things, and later on the stunt coordinator kind of moved in, and it made it a lot easier for stunt performers.
And just to add to what Bobby's saying, I think what he's saying too is that, again, time changes a lot of things. But when the Stuntmen's Association was formed in 1961, I think it had a lot to do with changing a lot of things, because, you know, coordinators and ramrods, and that's what they used to be called in those days, became a reality. And their input of hiring and setting things up, it just added so much to the technology and to our industry. And I think you go back to 61, I don't know if you go back much farther than that. Not that Yakima and Cliff didn't set things up like that, but there was no association in those times, you know. And they were more individuals in our industry that were called two-card carriers. That when I say that, you'd have to explain that, being one was an extra card, which I worked on for many years. I know that Bobby did, and so many of our people in business, and there's a Screen Actors Guild at the same time. And it was a time for the studios to save money, because you could be an extra, you could do a stunt, but then they didn't have to call you back. But once the association, as we know it to be, was formed, it really changed our industry to where now you have guys that can only work as SAG men, I mean Screen Actors Guild, stunt people, and coordinators and ramrods and stuff like that came into existence, really. You know, it was a time that changed. I mean, a stuntman in those cases, in the early days, they weren't really allowed to talk, you see, because you were a stuntman and you hit the ground. How can a stuntman talk? I mean, that's not really them, you know what I mean? But that was all to change as our industry changed, and all of a sudden we found ourselves with more, you know, more stunt people that were well-rounded, because so many of us were kind of rounded in one area, whether it be horses or cars or whatever the case might have fit that individual. But once it became a rounded individual, where all the young people today, for example, so many young people today are so well-rounded. They can lay a car down, a bike down, they can drive a car, they can horseback, they can do a high fall, they can do it all. And it's really, for a stunt coordinator or second unit director today, it's really great, because now I don't have to take 50 guys. I can take 5, because I can just point to any one of the 5 and they can almost do it all. Or yesterday I would take 50, for example, and out of the 50, I could get somebody to do something, because you see, they didn't all do it. But out of those 50 people, whatever I was going to do tomorrow. But today, I can just point to you, you're falling on the horse, you're doing the high fall, you're turning the car over. I don't even think about it, and I put all my energy towards, if I happen to be the director or the coordinator or working on behalf of the director, I can give my energy to help him do what he wants to do.